The blueprint for every financial disaster is pretty much the same. It's a story we see told over and over again, just with different names and different dates, but always with the same ending.
It all starts with this seductive lie, one that gets whispered across generations. The belief that we've somehow entered a new era, that the old rules, they just don't apply anymore, that this time is different. Well, it never is.
So, to really understand why systems fail, you have to look beyond the spreadsheets and the algorithms. Because at the very heart of our markets isn't cold logic, it's the volatile engine of human emotion. Every single financial boom is built not on fundamentals, but on the dream of endless prosperity. The stage might change, but the script, it stays exactly the same. In the 1920s, the asset was stocks, and it was all fueled by cheap credit and this passionate belief that the market was a guaranteed path to wealth. Then you fast forward 80 years, and the asset is housing. But the mass psychology, it was identical. A dangerous collective delusion that property values could never, ever fall. The thing is, this collective dream is always fragile, and eventually that fantasy collides head-on with reality. When the belief finally shatters, the entire system built on it starts to just consume itself. And the classic example of this kind of internal collapse, it came in 1929.
The whole thing unraveled with incredible speed and violence. On October 29, 1929, what we now call Black Tuesday, the illusion didn't just crack, it completely vaporized. This wasn't a market correction. No, this was a complete evaporation of wealth. A decade of paper fortunes just vanished in a matter of hours, as the whole structure, built on nothing but leverage and speculation, simply ceased to exist.
And that shockwave didn't stay on Wall Street. Oh no, it ripped right through the fabric of the nation. As the banks started to fail, they took the life savings of millions of ordinary people right down with them. At the height of the Great Depression that followed, 1 in every 4 working Americans had no job. The pain of that collapse was very real, and it was absolute.
So we know systems can implode from their own internal weaknesses, but they're also deeply vulnerable to shocks from the outside world. And in 1973, the global economy was about to find out just how vulnerable it was to a whole new kind of geopolitical weapon. That weapon was oil. See, in response to American support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War, the oil-producing nations of OPEC decided to cut off supply to the West. The price of crude oil didn't just rise, it quadrupled. The industrial engines of the world's most powerful economies were basically starved of fuel, and they just ground to a halt.
This external shock created a brand new economic monster. It was a paradox that economists, up until that point, had believed was impossible: stagflation. You had the economy shrinking, while at the same time prices were soaring. This crisis completely redrew the map of global power. It proved that controlling energy was every bit as potent as any military.
But sometimes the greatest threat isn't a public mania or some external force. Sometimes it's a machine, one that's designed by the system's own insiders for the sole purpose of generating profit, no matter how much risk it creates for everyone else. And that, right there, was the story of the 2008 financial crisis.
This machine was fed by the simple American dream of homeownership. It started by handing out millions of incredibly risky subprime loans to people who really couldn't afford them. Then, these toxic loans were all bundled together into these complex bonds. But here's the critical act of deception. Credit rating agencies were literally paid to stamp these things with a AAA rating, the highest possible mark of safety. That poison was then sold to pension funds and investors all over the world.
And the machine just kept running, right there in plain sight, because every single key player had a powerful incentive to keep it going. The investment banks were making billions creating and selling these products. The ratings agencies were collecting huge fees for giving them that fraudulent seal of approval. And the regulators, the very people meant to be the guardians of the system, well, they just looked the other way.
Then, on September 15, 2008, the machine finally broke. The bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. That was the trigger. In that one moment, the trust that acts as the lifeblood of the entire global financial system just evaporated. Credit markets froze solid. The world economy literally stopped.
And in the aftermath of every single one of these crises, a really clear and disturbing pattern emerges. You see this fundamental disconnect between the fate of the financial system and the fate of the people it's actually supposed to serve. Just look at 2008. A crisis caused by Wall Street was solved with massive bailouts for Wall Street while millions of regular people on Main Street lost their homes. Then you look at 2020. An external health crisis led to a response that fueled the fastest stock market recovery in history, all while small businesses were forced to shut their doors for good. The outcomes really reveal who the system is actually designed to protect.
The conclusion here is pretty inescapable. The financial architecture is built for its own preservation. In every crisis, the system saves itself, but the real consequences, they're borne by the public. Profits are always privatized, while the losses are socialized.
So when you look at these events across a century, they stop being isolated incidents. They become a predictable, repeating cycle. And that forces you to ask the most sobering question of all: have we actually learned anything?
The anatomy of a collapse really has 4 clear phases. First, there's a period of just irrational optimism. Then that evolves into a kind of collective blindness to all the growing risk. After that comes a single trigger event that completely shatters confidence. And finally, you get the fallout, where society pays the price. The names change, the dates change, but the blueprint, that stays the same.
But maybe the most fatal flaw of all is our institutional amnesia. After each disaster, we build new safeguards. But in the quiet years that follow, as the fear fades and the greed comes back, those protections are slowly lobbied against, they're weakened, they're dismantled, leaving the system just as vulnerable as it was before. So we know the pattern, we know the mechanics, we know the human cost. Really, the only question that remains isn't if it's going to happen again, it's what the trigger will be next time.